But thank you all so much for joining us for tonight's program. Author Leah Konen will discuss her new thriller, The Last Room on the Left, in this installment of Author Hour in Massachusetts. Leah is the author of Keep Your Friends Close, You Should Have Told Me, The Perfect Escape, All the Broken People, as well as several young adult novels, including Love and Other Train Wrecks and The Romantics. Her books have been featured in Vogue, Rolling Stone, Marie Claire, Reader's Digest, and the New York Post, among many others. She lives in Brooklyn with her husband, their daughters, and their dog, Farley, who I got to meet a little bit earlier. And just a little bit about the book. I'll sort of whet your appetite, and Leah will tell us much more about it. But about The Last Room on the Left, which was just released last Tuesday, it is a thriller. The caretaker at an isolated mountain hotel finds herself fighting for her life and sanity in this twisty, addictive thriller. Kerry's life is in shambles. Her husband has left her. Her drinking habit has officially become a problem. And though the deadline for her big book deal, the one that was supposed to change everything, is looming, she can't write a word. When she sees an ad for a caretaker position at a revitalized roadside motel in the Catskills, she jumps at the chance. It's the perfect getaway to finish her book and start fresh. But as she hunkers down in a blizzard, she spots something through her window, a pale arm peeking out from a heap of snow. Trapped in the mountains and alone with a dead frozen body, Kerry must keep her head and make it out before the killer comes for her too. But it is a deadly game of cat and mouse but is this game of deadly cat or mouse all in her mind? The body count begs to differ. This superbly crafted novel of suspense that will thrill and delight fans of Lucy Foley, Alice Feeney, and Sarah Pearse received a starred review from Library Journal. This book has been getting a lot of good reviews and a lot of big buzz. Leah, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you guys for having me. It's so cool to just talk with such a huge group of libraries and librarians. I think that's just awesome that you guys have this really vibrant community.
Yeah, thanks, Leah. Yeah, we have a good mix, I think, of virtual and in-person attendance tonight. So, Leah, I kind of rambled on there about the synopsis of your book, but why don't you tell us in your own words a little bit more about the book that you've just published?
Sure. So, The Last Room on the Left, right here, is it's set in the winter in a storm, if that sounds familiar to anyone right now. I know it's freezing here in New York City. And it's basically, I'm sure that they have these in Massachusetts too, but I guess in the last like decade or so, people have started to kind of revamp these old roadside motels that used to just be these really budget accommodations, kind of for families on road trips. And then a lot of them shut down. And so now people have started to kind of, pour more like city money and kind of really revamp them and make them very Instagrammable. And my family and I have a house up in the Catskills in New York. And so we see these kinds of things all the time. And I always thought it would be fascinating to set a story there and to kind of explore kind of the isolation of and the strangeness of a place like that used to be maybe a really vibrant place in maybe the 1950s, 1960s, and then was shut down for so long and then has kind of had this resurgence. So Kerry, our writer who cannot finish her book, which I think any writer will find very relatable, uh, basically takes this job as a winter caretaker for the motel, and her plan is to hunker down and write and finish this novel that she has sold for a bunch of money, but she cannot get the rest of the payment until she actually turns it in. And so, kind of everything in her life is riding on her finishing this. And when she arrives, the very first day, she sees the hand of what she believes is the prior caretaker, who was there the month before, dead out in the snow. So that kind of throws her whole plan out of whack. And instead of, battling writer's block, she finds that she is potentially battling a killer who's still be around as the snow is coming down and she's becoming more and more isolated.
Leah, I've heard the book, the setting anyway, compared to The Shining. And I think that you have even a couple of references at the beginning of the book. I want to speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think The Shining is, this amazing thing. I have almost equal love for the book and the Kubrick movie. I think they're so different. They're both kind of masterpieces in their own right. So it's in no way a retelling or anything like that, but definitely inspired by, to me, what always spoke the most um, about The Shining was this idea that I think King does so well, and he does it in more than just that book, in many books, about a writer really struggling to do what they know that they can do and they know they need to do. And I think a lot of times when we see this character, it's usually, a lot of times it's a man. So I wanted to kind of do this setup, but kind of with all women. So we have three different narrator or two different narrators, but three main women that come up in the story: Kerry, Siobhan, and Allison, who are all kind of loosely connected in Brooklyn, and they all have kind of different creative focuses and things that they're pursuing. So Kerry is a novelist, Siobhan is a filmmaker, and Allison is an actress. And I really wanted to kind of, loosely inspired by The Shining and what Jack Torrance goes through trying to, complete his novel. And obviously that does not happen and the whole thing goes off the rails. I wanted to kind of throw these women into this setting and see how it would affect their creativity as they try to really finish their projects and kind of, reach for their creative dreams and their goals.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to introduce us to the three female characters. And so, again, I know we don't want to go into spoilers, but do you want to address any of the sort of the supporting characters? You want to introduce us to any of them, or sort of
Yes.
talk about the neighborhood a bit?
Yeah. So yeah, we have Carrie, who's our main character, and she is, she's having a tough run of it. She is trying to finish her book, but she's also just recently kind of had a couple of unsuccessful rounds of IVF. She was trying to start a family with her husband. Her drinking has just become a big problem, and her marriage has kind of fallen apart because of the drinking. And she has, I think, I for each of the women I liked that their creative struggles were different. So for Carrie, she has this great idea. She has all the backing. She's got a big publisher on board. She's already sold movie rights, but she can't finish it. And Siobhan is very different. Siobhan is a filmmaker, but she has kind of, to make money, she is, has a day job of kind of just doing soulless, like little advertising sizzle reels. Instead of, she actually wants to make a short film. And Siobhan kind of has the opposite problem, whereas she's always got a camera in her hand, she's always producing, but she really lacks focus. And then you have Allison, who is loosely friends with both of them, and Allison is an actress who is feeling like she kind of missed her chance to really break out because she's a woman of a certain age. She's in her early 40s, and she's kind of, or she might, sorry, late 30s, and she's, kind of aged out of these ingenue roles and a lot of the things that people are casting. And so they're all kind of dealing with the different creative struggles in different ways. And then, of course, you have the motel and the kind of a mix of locals and people who've come up from the city around them. So you have Jeremy next door, who has a lot of money, works in finance down in Manhattan, or used to be in Manhattan, and has moved up full time and has this kind of fantastic modernist house that he's poured all this money into. And then you have Denise and Tyler, who are the locals in the Victorian, kind of on the other side of the property. And I'm sure this happens a lot in Massachusetts as well, but they're kind of all involved in a little bit of a property line dispute about, kind of how some of these lines have been drawn when the motel property was sold from the original owners into um, the woman who bought it from also from Manhattan.
Yeah, great. So I know we really can't go too far into the book without giving away some spoilers, but maybe within the first 20, 30 pages, do you want to discuss some of the things that was happening at the motel to sort of cause a scare with the characters?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the very first thing is, and I was really, I found just the idea of this super creepy, but Kerry shows up to do her first kind of, her first day there, and she's got her little guide that she's got printed out, that tells her everything that she needs and where to find the keys and all that. And she goes to the room that she's supposed to be staying in, the titular last room on the left, and it is completely looks occupied. It looks like the person who has been there before never left. And not only that, but it looks like there was kind of like a rager of a party that happened there. And so that event, I mean, that's kind of like the first thing that goes wrong. That's like, this is not right. She's supposed to, come to this completely empty place where she's just going to be, like keeping the heat running and like checking, the fireplaces and all that. And instead, she sees kind of this mess that's been left by the last caretaker. And so it was supposed to be her time to write, and that's kind of out for the first night. So she kind of goes to bed and thinks, maybe this will be taken care of in the morning. And then when she goes back to the room and is looking to try to understand what has happened, that's when she finds the dead body, which she sees kind of through the window into the little yard behind the motel. And I think, that is obviously not ideal for someone's self-writing retreat to find a dead body. So obviously she's terrified. But then I think what's also going on is she's just in a situation where she cannot she doesn't really have phone service. The everything is down because the storm is really brewing, so she has to kind of go out into the snow to try to find some help from one of the neighbors, and that's how she begins to connect with the different people who are living around the motel.
And so not only is this sort of like who done it, it has elements of romance, mystery, horror, thriller, suspense. But in addition to all that, you're telling the story from multiple points of view. You also have unreliable narrators. Can you talk a bit about how you sort of formatted this book?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the biggest thing is we have two narrators. One is Kerry, who we've already talked about. One is Siobhan, who's the one who's making her film. And Siobhan has actually come up to she's the last person who has been at the motel. And so there's their both of their kind of dual narratives, but it's also dual timelines because Kerry is in the present and then Siobhan's chapters are actually a month before. So, I mean, it was definitely like I think, Robert, you mentioned that on the audiobook you were, you have to really listen for the date to make sure you kind of knew where in time you were. Um, but yeah, it was I love this idea of, playing with the then and now and kind of contrasting the different ways that both women started off their journeys, which were both kind of in a similar vein in that they, both came up to this place, both took this job so that they could finish a creative project. And so it's really a kind of back and forth of them. And then there is at one point we do introduce a couple chapters from another person, but I do not want to go too much into that because I don't want to give anything away. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think I actually keep your friends close this way too, in that told by two women and with some jumping around in time. And I mean, it sounds super complicated, but now I'm almost gotten used to it. So it feels like a very natural way for me to write. But I think it's really fun and it creates this natural sense of kind of suspense and mystery when you're, watching events unfold like in the same place, the same physical place, but at different times. I think there's something really kind of compelling about that.
Leah, I ask this question of every thriller and mystery writer. So just kind of like taking a step back, how do you write a good thriller? And how do you, because you have to walk a fine line between leaving breadcrumbs, but then you also don't want to make it too predictable. You don't want to blindside necessarily the reader at the end. So I'm curious, with so many twists and turns, how do you get to a fulfilling ending?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. It is the kind of situation where, anyone who reads mysteries, who reads thrillers, and who loves the genre as much as I do, um, knows that I think the two equal frustrations that you can have, which is one, it was a huge twist. You're totally surprised, but there was no clues given. So you feel like it comes completely out of left field. So you're like, okay, you did surprise me, but it doesn't feel earned. I think that's frustrating. And then the other one that's frustrating is, of course, when, you on page three, you're like, okay, I got it. I know this is the person. So I think you're right. I think it is a balance. To me, like my goal, my target is that for my twists, I feel like, maybe like 80, 85, 90% of readers will miss them, but like 10 to 20% of readers are going to get them. I think if you don't have some readers getting this twist, that means that you didn't put enough clues and breadcrumbs, as you said, because you don't want it to feel like it was, just coming out of nowhere. And I think the perfect twist is one where, and I love this experience as a reader, where you get to it and you're so surprised, but then at the same time you feel that it was almost inevitable. And it's like, oh, how did I even miss it? And you can almost flip back through the pages and be like, oh, they talked about this here and that happened there. Um, I think a great example, not writer, but am just kind of heartbroken that David Lynch has passed. And so I've been rewatching everything. And I think, like I just rewatched Mulholland Drive, and it's just when you get to where things are kind of being made more clear and kind of unfolding, you suddenly see all these clues he left you that you didn't pick up on then, but then it's easy to kind of flip back in your mind and think like, oh wait, that was there, that happened, that happened. And I think that's kind of my goal for writing mysteries, is to leave enough that a super, super eagle-eyed reader might catch it, but most readers are going to feel like it was earned and it was satisfying.
So, Leah, we won't talk about the actual content of the twist at the end, but
Sure.
I was surprised. I thought I had finished the book, and the narrator kept talking, and there was an epilogue. And is that something that's common in your book, where you leave the reader with a twist at the very end?
Yeah, I like to keep people on their toes. I do.
Yeah.
I think I like yeah, I think to me that's fun. I remember like being in high school when I was first really getting into horror movies, and that really kind of suspenseful, almost magical feeling and terrifying feeling of, you're at the end of the movie and you're like, why does this movie keep going? Like it should have stopped now. I feel that everything's been resolved. And so you're just on the edge of your seat and you're like, something is still coming. And I think that's really fun. And so when I can, I love to include something like that. But that said, only if it works for the story and only if it makes sense. And I guess Robert, without giving away, you can tell me if it made sense to
Oh,
you.
it
But
totally made sense. It totally made sense.
ultimately it's with the reader. So some readers are gonna fly through it and say, oh, I liked everything except for the last 5 pages. And some are gonna, say like, wow, those last 5 pages are what made it.
Yeah, no, certainly I enjoyed the book overall. I enjoyed the ending, and then I enjoyed the the second ending, the twist at the end. So now we'll take about 15 minutes or so and talk about you, Leah. But we can certainly circle back to the book as well. But Leah, you had referenced, as part of the plot, Kerry is going to this place because she has writer's block, and so she is going to this very isolated place that's spotty cell service, and when there's a storm they lose power, and so she's really isolated. I'm curious. That's kind of an extreme way to kind of break your writer's block. What do you do to counter any writer's block that you might encounter?
I definitely don't go out into the woods and seclude myself. I don't, I think it's very, I think it's kind of this dream scenario we have that that's what's going to work. And I think it's actually rare that that does. I mean, for some people, I'm sure it does. And I think like there is something to limiting distractions. But I also think that that can create like a huge amount of pressure too. When it feels like, okay, you all you have to do is this. So for me, like I think when I'm feeling like not as inspired and like I'm blocked, I it usually means that something in the book is not working. I am a big plotter and I like to not set in stone, but I like to have definitely a roadmap of where I'm going. And I find that if I'm really resisting writing something, it's either a very tricky thing to write and I know that it's the right thing and I just have to kind of force myself to do it, or I might be resisting because it's not the right kind of way to go and I need to maybe do more work on character, on plot, on the themes of the book and really kind of pull them out so that I feel that I can write.
So that's interesting. So you're a plotter, excellent. So can you walk us, sort of in general, can you walk us through your writing process, and do you have a daily routine?
Uh, Daily-ish. I think, yeah, I mean, I think I can tell you that I definitely like come up with the idea. I sit with it for, a few weeks, a month, a few months, however long, and I let it kind of just bang around my head for a while before I ever even think about putting any words down. And then I actually have two books that I read and use for every book. And one of them is called Anatomy of Story, which is actually a screenwriting book. They're both screenwriting books. So one of them is Anatomy of Story by Truby, and the other one is Save the Cat. And they're kind of two sides of the same coin. So Save the Cat is all about the beats that almost every screenplay, every kind of standard screenplay you see is going to hit. They're so baked in that you don't even notice them, but once you kind of are looking for them, you start to see them almost in everything. And then Anatomy of Story is also kind of like storytelling moments and narrative arc, but it's more from a character and thematic perspective. So I kind of use both of those to kind of get my head turning and think about the plot. And, I might not have it like fully, concrete or anything like that, but I at least have an idea of where I'm going. And then I actually write in software called Scrivener, which I love. And I think what's great about that is it really helps you kind of outline everything and break it out scene by scene. So, each kind of scene like that, I have like a little paragraph about what's going to happen in the book. So, or in that scene. So I don't feel like I'm ever opening a Word document and just completely staring at a blank cursor that needs to fill 300 pages. Like, I feel like I have things in kind of more manageable chunks. Um, and that's kind of how I work through it. And then in terms of day to day, I have two small children. So one of them is she's 18 months.
Oh,
You might hear her screaming right now. I'm not sure if that's her or the 5-year-old. But yeah, I mean, it's now in my life, it's like a lot of it, it just has to do with when I can get the time, when the children are napping, when my oldest is at school, when my husband is home from work and can take them. So it's not like as firm of a schedule as I think it was before then, but that's how it goes.
Yeah, that's life. It's amazing you're able to do what you're doing while raising two young children. Um, you yourself are a big name author, but are there any specific authors or books that have influenced your writing? You just cited two books. Any authors that you've read either currently or growing up that you feel has had an influence on your writing style?
Yeah, well, I mean, I will say growing up, I was a huge mystery person, and I read every Mary Higgins Clark like that I could find in my library. I love libraries. I grew up in a very small farming town. We did not have a bookstore. We didn't have access to anything like that. So every book that came into my life came in through the library, and I think libraries are so absolutely important. So first off, thank you guys all for just what you do and for events like these. Um, but yeah, so Mary Higgins Clark, I think Agatha Christie, like pretty much any mystery I could get my hands on. Nancy Drew, the Babysitters Club mysteries. I had some fun mysteries, when I was a kid. And then I had a period where I would say I kind of pulled away from that and was doing like kind of like just my own kind of crash course in like classic lit, like Henry James and Austen and Thomas Hardy and Anthony Trollope and just like all these kind of mostly like British classics. And then as I kind of got older and, became an adult and started reading more modern again, I found that I used to write YA novels, but I found that everything I was reading was these kind of like darker domestic mysteries. I just adored Gillian Flynn. Actually, her two books before Gone Girl were my favorites, and then I did like Gone Girl as well. But I loved Dark Places, and Sharp Objects was actually my favorite. Ton of French was another huge like. I would say those two were like the ones where I felt like, wow, I really want to write mysteries. I think especially Ton of French, like she's doing something with her Dublin Murder Squad mysteries that I feel it's hard to replicate. Just such incredible character work into these classic mysteries. So, I think those were the first kind of modern mystery authors that like really got me going. Oh, and Leah Moriarty, who I adore.
Yeah.
And then as I've written more, I think I kind of, jump in and out of that genre now. A current favorite is Helen Phillips, who wrote The Need, which the way she like unpacked motherhood was, fascinating to me. Um, so yeah, I mean, I read kind of all over. I just if someone tells me a book is good, I pick it up. I read across genres, high, low, all of it. I think that's the most important thing is to just as much as it is to practice writing, just to read and read widely is just, if not even more important, I think.
So tell us a bit about your origin story. How did you get started as a writer, and what was your journey like to get published?
Um, well, I think like a lot of writers, it was something that I always kind of did since I was, a kid. We had our first little Dell or Gateway computer back in the 90s, and I would just sit there and just kind of make up stories, type them out, and it was just something that was always there for me. I was lucky that my parents were always reading to me, were always taking me to the library. Books were like a really big part of my early years. And then when I got to college, I thought about studying English lit, but I felt journalism was more practical. This is back in the time when journalism felt like a practical field, maybe not so much anymore. But I think the really great thing about that is journalism brought me to New York City, where I wanted to work as a magazine writer. And so I did work as a writer and editor in magazines for a few years. And then I kind of got laid off like three times in 5 years because it was right when every magazine is kind of just falling apart and folding. And kind of even before all the layoffs, I had started to take writing classes in New York City. I'd started to meet a lot of authors. 'Cause, this was back before it is like it is now. Like I would say this back in like 2008, 2009. Being an author wasn't this like extremely public, extremely social media, like, events all the time thing. So I would go to, I loved in Soho, the store McNally Jackson. I would go down there to their events and I would see these authors and they just seemed like regular people. And I think that was the first time I really allowed myself to imagine that that's something that I could actually do. I'd always loved writing and always kind of wanted to be a writer secretly, but did feel like this really far off goal that's not really a possibility. And so once I was kind of in New York and really exposed to all these people who were doing it, then I kind of assessed like what I really wanted to do. And it was writing. So it was a lot of, early mornings, late nights, weekends, because I was always working full time for years. And then I would say about like, oh, 5, 7, no, it's got to be longer than that. Maybe 8 years ago or so, I was able to really like do it full time, and that's been wonderful.
And I noticed that in your bio, it mentions you also have YA books, young adult books, books for teenagers. So
Yeah.
I'm curious, can you tell us a little bit about some of your YA books?
Yeah, they're very different. They're not mysteries. They're mostly like contemporary. Some of them are a little bit romance. But it's definitely what I felt like I wanted to write when I was younger, when I was in my early 20s. I think it felt, like an easy time to reflect back on at that point in my life. And then I felt like I, kind of had done that, and then I wanted to move on and do adult and really do thrillers. So that's definitely where my focus is now. I don't still write YA, but I will say that the last one I did is also a snow book and also a tight timeline. Love and Other Trainwrecks, which is really fun. And so yeah, if you like The Last Room on the Left, you probably would like that in a completely different way, but it just has that like kind of trapped in the snow feeling, which I think is always a fun place to play around with.
So, what advice would you give to aspiring writers?
Um, my biggest advice is I already kind of touched on it, but to read as much as you possibly can and to develop a writing practice that is as regular as it can be. I don't think it means you have to write every single day or you have to write a certain amount every single day, but I think writing a little bit often and frequently and kind of treating it like anything else that takes practice. Like if you were a runner, you would not expect to be able to run however many miles if you didn't do it for months. And I think writing is just like that. It's a muscle that you have to exercise. I think we talk a lot and think about a lot about natural talent and genius and all that. And I think to me, the talent is really the desire to do it, and the interest in it that keeps you practicing. Because I think the writers we love and we look to are good because they are writing and they are putting out work and they are making themselves better. So that's, I mean, it's a lot of times not what people want to hear because it's just like basically practice and read a lot. But to me, that's what it is. And then I guess I would say also is not to, to kind of take things one thing at a time, focus on finishing your book and making it as good as possible and making it the best book you can before you start trying to think about the state of the industry and making connections and all that, because that all can come in time. But the most important thing always is to just write the best book you can. And at the end of the day, that's really the only part of the business you have control over. And I say that, 10 books in now, that's true. It's all that you really can control is the work you put out.
So before I ask the next question, let me preface it with this. So this got a starred review in Library Journal. BookBub named it one of the best mystery and thrillers of the winter. Book Riot, best book of the week last week. Gizmodo, one of the most anticipated books of the month, and Paste called it one of the most anticipated mysteries and thrillers of the year. So, with all that said, my question, have any of the reader reactions or reviews surprised you?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be totally honest. People, it has surprised me, and maybe I should have known better, but people have been really frustrated by any association with The Shining. And I think it's that's just kind of something that is a matter of, reader expectations. And I think The Shining is such a special thing. And so people don't want things compared to it unless it's going to be like, really, really a retelling or something like that. So I guess that's been the biggest surprise. Because I often, Keep Your Friends Close was like loosely inspired by Strangers on a Train. And, I'm always playing with kind of classics of uh of thriller and suspense and horror. And but something about The Shining, I think it's just too precious. I think people just adore it. And so as soon as, there's been it's funny because the starred review from Library Journal mentioned it and said that it was done well and that, I was kind of tipping my hat to King. But I, a lot of Goodreads readers are like, this isn't like The Shining, this isn't The Shining. And
Yeah.
so I think that's been kind of the biggest, kind of learning. And I think it's totally fair. People really want to know what book that they're getting when we're asking them to, spend money or even just spend time with the book. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, it's definitely not a retelling. It is, loosely kind of just the vibes of The Shining kind of inspired.
Yeah. The setting.
But I
Yeah.
think, yeah, I think that's definitely been the biggest thing that's kind of stood out.
Now, Leah, I live on Goodreads. I was reading the reviews of your book. This book, at the bare minimum, people, is a four. Okay, at the bare minimum. So,
Thank
so
you.
this, I'm going to rate it at 3.5. I'm going to rate it at 3.7. This is at least is a four. So, and I was reading some of the reviews, and let's not focus on the negative, but yeah, the blurb on the cover, I think, referencing The Shining, I think, like you said, some people take that. Shining very seriously when you reference The
It's
Shining. So
fair. It's a masterpiece. It's fair. I get it. I get it. So,
yeah,
we all, and I would never ever purport to be like anywhere near King, who is just, I mean, talk about an inspiration. I didn't actually mention him, but um, I read pretty much everything he's done and constantly inspiring. So I understand.
so this question usually works better for nonfiction authors, but I'll ask it to you anyway. If you could pick one thing for readers to remember about your book, what would it be and why?
That is a great question. One thing for them to remember about the book, I would say, I mean, this isn't like a fact to remember or anything, but I would love for when a reader puts down the book to feel that the kind of the mood, and the atmosphere of it has stayed with them and the feeling of kind of being in this escape and kind of being caught out in the snow and just that those kind of visceral details. I think to me that's what when I put down a book, I think about the characters and I think about all that, but I also think about what the book made me feel and what it felt like and what my visually I was imagining when I was reading it. And so I hope some of that stays with them.
So, do you have a favorite scene or chapter from your book? Any
Um,
highlights that you want to speak of without with avoiding
well, you're
spoilers?
gonna you're not gonna like it because you already said that there was a lot of drinking and too much drugs. But I love a party scene, and so kind of everything kind of comes to a head with some of the women. They have this big kind of party on Siobhan's last night in the motel, and I personally love when you just throw different characters together and just like make them butt heads with each other and kind of you know those feelings of those scenes where you just have this tension, you're like, something is going to go wrong and it's coming. And I think it was so much fun to write, and I love reading stuff like that. So that's probably my favorite.
So is there a character you feel especially connected to, or that's a reflection of yourself? I'm wondering how much of Leah is in Kerry, for example.
Well, luckily, thankfully, I do not personally deal with a drinking problem, because that sounds extremely, extremely challenging and really difficult. Um, so I can't speak to that, but I definitely feel, I don't think quite in the same way that Carrie, the way Carrie handles it is a lot different than the way I do, but I think it's difficult to be a writer and to be kind of public about it, and to have expectations of how your career might go and how a certain book is going to go and how a launch is going to go, and then to have to also process the reality of it when it happens. And I think as writers, we all deal with that. And I really feel for Carrie in that, because she is kind of on the outside having this, everyone's like, oh, you sold this book for all this money and this happened and this happened. But on the inside, it's very hard for her. And I think a lot of writers, especially in today's day and age where, we're on social media, we're doing these events and everything, and they're wonderful. It also, it can be hard to be a writer, I think. And there's not as much space for that, or there's not as much like privacy as there used to be, where you could kind of, put your book out and then pull back.
Mhm.
So I definitely understand kind of where she's coming from. I am not, leaving my family and going off to a random motel and drinking all the wine in the place. I would just quietly go to the coffee shop and try to get some work in while the kids nap. But I think the feelings deep inside of wanting to put something good out in the world and being afraid that you're not going to be able to do it, or it won't turn out how you imagine, I think is super relatable, whether you're a writer or you're doing any work that you care about.
So I'm going to ask a couple more questions. I'll start to wind down my questions. Then we'll go to the audience questions. I had a couple submitted in advance, and then we have a couple in the chat and Q&A. What's next for Leo? And are you working on any new projects or books at the moment? I know you have a 5-year-old and an 18-month-old and a dog and a husband, and I'm sure you're very busy, family wise. But any books in the works?
Yes. I actually have a book that is pretty much done. I'm revising it right now. I cannot share the details because we haven't announced it yet. And I love mystery writers, so I love to build suspense. But it is so much fun, and I'm like beyond thrilled about it. And I think kind of in the same way that The Last Room on the Left was just kind of dipping its toe into more little horror elements, this one does as well. So I think it's going to be really fun.
And let's see here. Oh, yeah. Well, just in general, where can people find out more about you, Leah? Do you have a website? Do you have a newsletter? What are your socials? Where can people learn more about you?
Yes. So I keep it super simple. It's leahkonen.com is my website. My handles are all at Leah Konen, and my Substack, which is, I think, where I kind of am putting the most energy these days, and where I have the most fun, because there's a little bit more space to kind of, write an essay or like share feelings and all of that, is leahkonen.substack.com. So please sign up for that. I think that is kind of the best place to find me right now.
Excellent. So, folks, if you have any questions for Leah, now's the time. Get them into the chat, get them into the Q&A. So one of the questions written in advance, someone wondering if The Last Room on the Left was made into a movie, Leah, who would you like to play Kerry, and who would you like to play Siobhan?
Oh gosh. That is, let's see. I would say I'm not like super up on actors, so I let me give terrible answers. But I think, like really strong kind of women. I love I think like for Siobhan, like you could see almost like an Anya Taylor-Joy, or I love Margaret Qualley. Um so yeah, that's kind of, I guess if I had to say, we could start with that.
There you go. Someone also asked, is there a genre you'd like to explore in the future that you haven't yet? I know you've sort of made your mark, kind of have a niche here with these thrillers, but and you've done YA in the past. Are we sticking with thrillers, or do you want to explore different genres?
Well, like I said, I'm definitely still thrillers, but I do want to play more with horror elements to thrillers. I think um, it's so interesting, and I love these kind of books right now that are kind of towing the line between both. So I definitely want to stick there and play around with that. I mean, just like if I had to just be able, if there was a book I could write that I don't personally feel equipped to now, um, it would be kind of speculative fiction, anything kind of like a near future, the books that have, like a Station 11 or something like that, where it's not too far into the future, but it feels, grounded in reality, but also like kind of a different world than we're living in. The Room and Alarm, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on Leave the World Behind is another one that to me is just absolutely incredible. I already mentioned Helen Phillips, The Need, or even something like I I do not feel I could do that right now, but a Rachel Yoder, Night Bitch, like to be able to write something like where a woman thinks like maybe she's turning into a dog, but it still feels so grounded in a real story. Like that to me is just incredible, and I would love to be able to do that. And maybe who knows, maybe one day.
Very cool. Haven't read the book and haven't seen the show either. It's on my to do list, uh, to watch list, to read list. So Carol asks, I have not read any of your books yet, but she plans on reading this one. Do you have any recurrent protagonists or characters? And if not, have you considered this? I think all your books are standalones. Is that correct?
They are. They're all standalones. But I will say that the book, the secret book that I haven't announced yet, that I'm working on now, has a very young investigator character, like a private investigator, and she's like this Gen Z, like kind of woman who just she's kind of like the polar opposite of what you would expect for an investigator. And I completely fell in love with this character. And so now I'm like, is there a way for me to get her to come in for different books? And who knows, we'll see. So like for the first time ever, the idea kind of crossed my mind just because I really, really loved engaging with this character so much.
Excellent. So I think that wraps up the audience questions. Leah, was there anything you wanted me to ask you that I failed to do so? Anything you want to leave the audience with?
Um, did you not ask me anything? I don't think so, but I guess I would say for you, I'll ask you, for you as a librarian, um, what do you think is kind of, I don't know, like what do you see anything with people coming in, like what kind of books people are gravitating towards or anything like that?
Oh, you've turned the tables on me,
I
Leah.
turn the tables. I'm just so
Nice.
I love librarians and I love, I find it fascinating.
Yeah. So, unfortunately for you, I am in charge of our media collections and our periodicals. So, I'm not
Okay.
the one tracking the statistics for our adult fiction. I do think, though, that mysteries and thrillers are probably top one or two. So, those remain very popular for sure. So, I think you're writing in the right genre. But
I
good
don't think they're
question.
going I don't think they're going away. I mean, I think it's something people have loved to read forever and will continue to do so.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm gonna do some research on my end. I'll send you a follow up email. So, folks,
Sure.
let's give Leah a big virtual round of applause for a great discussion. She carried me. Thank you, Leah. Folks, so look for an email from me later tonight with a link to this recording, as well as information about where you can purchase Leah's copy of The Last Room on the Left. I have my copy too. Also available on Audible. If you're going to buy the book, I highly recommend you use Wellesley Books, our official bookstore partner, and there'll be a link to purchase an online copy in the email. I will also send information about some other upcoming virtual author visits. Tomorrow night, we have Scott. I have to learn the last name. It's not Turo. I've been saying Turo, but it's not Turo. But we have Scott Turo coming. I'm very excited for his new book, Presumed Innocent. A lot of great folks lined up over the next 6 weeks or so. I couldn't be more pleased about tonight. So, folks, look for the email and please take the feedback survey when you exit the Zoom for those watching live. So, thank you all so much, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their night. Thanks again, Leah.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you to everyone who joined and to your whole association.
Yes, absolutely. Have a good one.